Welcome back, everyone. Hopefully you've enjoyed refreshments and you managed to avoid a cascade of glasses out there just now, just keeping you on your toes. I'm delighted now, if you weren't in the first session this morning, then just to inform you that unfortunately Yvonne Hawkins of HEPI hasn't been able to join us today, but we are delighted to have Nick Hillman instead from HEPI, the Higher Education Policy Institute, talk both about the current sort of developments in quality assurance, but also more widely about possible future legislation and his experiences on the last time around in 2011 with the white paper. And I think a little bit about how higher education featured in the 2015 general election. Nick has, for the last 2 years, been director of HEPI, the only independent higher education think tank, I think they call themselves, in the UK. But previously he worked for 6 years for David Willetts, the university's minister, and had his fair share of internal government and departmental scrapes in that time, and was also a politician himself, or political candidate for the Borough of Cambridge, so has all sorts of experience in many areas. Over to Nick.
Thanks very much, and a failed politician, I should add, because I stood and lost. But thank you for staying to the bitter end. I hope it'll be the sweet end of the conference, especially as I'm not the person that was advertised as the person being here. I must say, when I took over HEPI, which is a small specialist higher education think tank, as Alex said, it's very small. I had no idea that it might seem a more sustainable institution than HEPI, but we'll see what happens when the green paper comes out. And it's a great pleasure to be here, actually, for the second year running, I think, in this very room, because I'm a big fan of the work that Study UK and Alex in particular do to raise the profile of some of the non-traditional providers of higher education and to engage properly with the public policy debate. I want to say, I think, one particular thing on this, because my experience, I actually worked for David Willetts for 10 years in total, including 3.5 as his special advisor inside the business department. And I think sometimes people outside the higher education sector forget, or perhaps never knew, the degree to which civil servants look at the world through collective institutions. And I saw from my time in the department that officials lack the resources and the mechanisms, and sometimes, frankly, the wherewithal to go out and talk to individual academic and educational institutions. But they will listen to what organisations say collectively as a group. And that's why I think the existence of Study UK is so important. It may not always feel like it, given the obstacles the Home Office and other public sector organisations put in your way, but I would argue that that is another reason why it's so important to have a group like Study UK fighting your corner and simply educating and informing the public sector in Whitehall and Westminster about the things that you and your institutions do. Now, as you've heard, HEPI, the organisation I head up, the Higher Education Policy Institute, is a specialist think tank. Please note that we don't quite intentionally have the word university in our title. We really do try to engage within the resources that we have with the whole higher education debate, including with non-traditional providers of higher education. I never quite know whether to call them non-HEPI funded providers or alternative providers or challenger institutions. I think none of the phrases quite work, but we are supported financially by over 100 deliverers of higher education, and that includes around a dozen alternative providers such as the Academy of Contemporary Music, Arden University, BIM, BPPU, GSM London, Kaplan, IFS University College, ICMP, New College of Humanities, Pearson, Regent's University, the University of Law. And I think for me that's a very important list because it reflects the heterogeneity of the alternative provider part of the sector. And it also shows why it's no longer good enough for policymakers to think about HEPI-funded institutions being here and non-HEPI-funded institutions being here, because just as I love my music and just as the alternative music scene eventually became mainstream, I think the alternative provider scene on higher education is becoming mainstream. And we already have a diverse rainbow sector. And for me, the challenge is not how to harmonise that into a grey mush where everybody looks alike. It's how to ensure institutions can set their own strategies and play to their strengths. Now, although academics sometimes bristle when I say it, because it distinguishes us from learned academic journals, our role as a think tank is to make sure that our output, our policy recommendations and our evidence-based research is as accessible and readable as possible. And my little sort of test for all our output is, can it be read by someone who doesn't necessarily know very much about the sector, sort of ignorant but intelligent person, if you like, maybe new to the sector, on a train journey? And that is my test for all our output. And the things that I thought it might be helpful just to give a flavour of the output we've produced this year. We did just a couple of weeks ago, you may have seen, I got a full page in The Guardian, a survey of how many world leaders were educated in the UK higher education institution. We found 55 current world leaders, and we only looked at presidents, prime ministers and monarchs. We didn't go any further down than that, and we found 55, and we did we titled our research now, that's what I called soft power, because we were trying to get out of that sterile debate between the Home Office says we don't want foreigners coming here, BIS and other arms of government say we want the educational exports. We were trying to look at some of the non-economic benefits and get out of the security debate as well by looking at some of the other benefits that come from educating the world's future leaders. We did a comparison recently of the UK and German higher education systems. Germany has recently, at least the 7 German states that had tuition fees have recently abolished them, and I think there are, if there are not lessons from Germany on that, there probably are some good lessons from Germany on their approach to international students and also their high levels of spending on R&D. And I'm sorry I wasn't here this morning, but I was at the German embassy talking to the German Academic Exchange Service and some of the people who work for the German ambassador about how we can take that work forward. We did a paper on level 4, level 5 technical education, the stuff that sits a little bit beneath full honours degrees. Earlier in the summer, we did a submission to the Diamond Review on university funding in Wales, which was quite controversial because we recommended the Welsh government, Welsh administration should maintain their system where Welsh students can take some of their funding to the other 4 parts of the UK, which is rather unpopular with Welsh universities, but I think an important part of student mobility within the UK. We did an election briefing document on all the main HE issues of the election, though we circulated to every election candidate for every party for whom we could find contact details, and there were thousands of them. We produced a collection of essays where we gave the opportunity for institutions to explain where they spend their tuition fees and how their strategies have changed since the new tuition fees regime came in, and it included Russell Group universities, it included a couple of alternative providers, it included a sixth form college that delivers HE, and so on. We delivered a polemic on how to improve access to research output, widening open access. We do a survey every year of 15,000 undergraduates on actually what their academic experience is really like. Not like the National Student Survey saying, are you satisfied? We do have that question, but we also say, how many hours are you really putting in? Do you turn up to the lectures at a timetable? Do you do academic work in the holidays? Are you happy? And it's much more wide-ranging. And I'm talking to Alex about ways in which we can capture some of the alternative providers in that survey, because I think it would be a very useful intelligence for you. We did a report on how student loans are treated in the national and departmental accounts, which predicted, before he announced it, George Osborne's abolition of maintenance grants, and made clear why the government is likely to try so hard to sell off the student loan book. And we've done a couple of surveys, which I think would be of particular interest to you, asking students what they think about studying alongside international students in the same lecture halls and seminar rooms. And we gave them positive and negative statements, and we showed that students recognise there are very deep educational benefits from studying in diverse classrooms alongside people from other countries. Now, when I was first invited to come and speak, which was a few weeks ago, it was only the last 48 hours when I was asked to fill this slot. But when I was first asked to come and speak, I couldn't quite work out if your timing of your conference was very good or very bad, because, of course, we were due the higher education green paper tomorrow, and even though it wouldn't have come out, we would have had a pretty good inkling if there was just 24 hours to go of what was going to be in it. But, of course, it's been delayed. That timetable's been blown off course. Admittedly, probably not too badly blown, of course. I still expect we'll see the green paper in the next 2 to 3 weeks. But as Paul Daniels used to say, every second counts, particularly when they want to implement a TEF by 2017, which means it's all got to really be in place by the middle of next year. And I've blogged about that timescale on our website and why it's so challenging. My worry, I think, about the debate that's going on in the HE sector at the moment about the green paper is that there seems to be a sort of assumption operating that the tricky bit is getting the green paper out there. And once the green paper's out there, we'll have a very clear sense of what the government wants to do, and it'll be a relatively smooth path between the green paper being produced and the world looking rather different. I must say, I take a different point of view to that. If BIS can't even agree with number 10 on the publication date of a green paper, which is currently where we are, I think we should be cautious in assuming that the green paper's proposals and the consultation that's done on the back of them will lead neatly and swiftly to legislation. And if you doubt me on that, consider that there was a moment in 2011 when the 2011 white paper came out, and white papers are meant to be closer to legislation than green papers, when legislation looked inevitable and necessary. And the impassable obstacle then, and I know because I was right in the thick of it in a department headed by a Lib Dem and liaising with number 10 in the Cabinet Office in the Treasury on getting legislation on the back of the white paper, was not opposition within the HE sector, nor was it things we hadn't thought of turning up during the consultation process that suddenly proved new obstacles. It was rather opposition within the government of the time. And it wasn't, it was a bit more complicated, I think, than sometimes people realise, because even the very department that wanted legislation, the department in which I work, the Business, Innovation and Skills Department, even within our own department, it wasn't as high a priority as people might think, because Royal Mail's privatisation, for example, shared parental leave, took a much higher priority. And I'm broadly a supporter of HE being in the business department, but one overlooked downside of HE being in the business department is that HE can often take a back foot to other issues where the priorities look more urgent. Then there was the problem the senior Lib Dems in the middle of government wanted higher education to disappear as an issue on the back of their broken pledge on the NUS. On Newsnight last night, Nick Clegg said that his biggest single mistake as Deputy Prime Minister was to sit next to David Cameron at PMQs. I think those of us in the HE sector might be able to think of somewhat bigger mistakes he made as Deputy Prime Minister, but nonetheless. And finally, and this is another bit of the picture that I don't think is always understood, is there were some deregulatory conservatives who instinctively didn't like the idea of extra legislation on the books, who joined the sort of anti-legislation side in the internal government discussions, if you like, and they said, why, for example, can't you just layer ever more conditions on the HEPI financial memorandum? And at the very least, a new bill always needs the support of the Treasury, the Cabinet Office, and number 10 before it can even be placed in front of MPs and Lords to debate. And while that Lib Dem blockage might have disappeared in a puff of smoke on the 7th of May, there are still Tories who will ask whether new legislation is necessary. And there are others who, while supportive, will regard higher education as less pressing than other areas of reform. It wouldn't surprise me, for example, if some Conservatives ask, why are we risking a row with universities when we should be socking it to a divided opposition and when we have our own fraught internal negotiations over Europe to get over. So I'm not saying the legislation won't occur this time. I think the odds on it happening are actually better than they were back in 2011. We've got more loose ends than need tying up. We've got a majority government. We've got a new minister who looks like he wants to do a lot in a hurry. But I still think if Joe Johnson does pull it off, it will be a very significant achievement in his first ministerial job. And either way, I think we're in for a bumpy ride, because the passage of new legislation is always messy. In fact, it should always be messy if the legislature is doing its job. And once we've all watched the new legislation go through the House of Commons and the House of Lords and come out the other end, I suspect we might all be inclined to agree with the 19th century Illinois politician who once said, "The making of laws is like the making of sausages. The less you know about the process, the more you respect the result." Now, I can't help thinking, of course, it would be remiss of me not to talk about some of the content of the Green Paper and only to talk about process. I mean, it might feel a little bit sterile if I was to say too much about quality assurance, teaching, widening participation in the entry and exit of providers, which we think will be the main themes, particularly as we've got a panel on those things in a minute. Given that, we've only got to wait a week or two, and we know precisely what the government's proposals are going to be. So I'm just going to restrict myself to saying one thing about teaching and one thing about the entry and exit of providers. When we, back in government in the sort of 2010 to 2012 period, tripled tuition fees, we did, I think it's fair to say, try to have our cake and eat it. We ran two horses that perhaps were contradictory. On the one hand, we said to students, don't worry, just behave exactly as you've always behaved. This is, even though your debt is going up, it's not real debt. It's nothing like credit card debt. You won't feel the pain. You'll barely notice it coming out of your pay packet at the other end. It's very progressive, don't worry. But at the same time, we said to institutions, you're going to be hit by a wave of consumer power with students behaving completely differently to how they've behaved before. And I think actually both of those contradictory claims turned out to be half true. We saw full-time students rolling up in similar numbers to ever before, maybe slightly more from tougher socioeconomic backgrounds. But part-time numbers have fallen very dramatically, and that is going to be a theme of the next but one HEPI publication, which I think has some important recommendations in it, and will be out before the spending review. Meanwhile, students did arrive on campus, I think, with somewhat more demanding desires. And I think universities did respond to that, but they responded in incremental and somewhat slower-paced ways than perhaps ministers expected. And I think we proved that in a publication we did in February, which I've mentioned, where we got different institutional leaders to explain how their institutions had responded to the new world. And our other research reflects that. Our big annual survey of undergraduates shows that on average, and of course it is only an average, students only do 3/4 of the work the QAA say they should do. The other recent survey we did of what students think of international students found 54% of students think international students work harder than home ones, and only 4% think the opposite, the home students work harder than international ones, which at the very least is not completely surprising that people who travel halfway around the world work very hard when they get here, but at the very least it suggests there is perhaps some room for improvement among home students. And I'm sorry, I've knocked the thing. I might close this because I'm leaning on it, if that's okay. Now, it may seem a little bit unfair on the sector because higher education, particularly at a research-intensive university, is not just big school. I understand that. And it can't be evaluated in precisely the same way, despite some of Anthony Selden's quite persuasive arguments. But if you're the minister, the university's minister, I think it leaves you with a problem, because if you're challenged in, let's say, the House of Commons or by the Treasury, who say, prove that the reforms that you put through had the impact on teaching quality and the student experience and the academic experience that you said they would do, it's very hard to point to a single data set that proves that they have. Whereas on the research side, there's lots of data sets you can point at to prove that UK research is second only to the US, that on some measures is the most efficient in the world, and so on. So I think it's understandable that Joe Johnson's chosen the teaching excellence framework agenda as the one he wants to own. And I think it's intriguing that he promised, I wrote this down when he first announced it, that it wouldn't be big, bossy and bureaucratic. And I think that is the right goal. However, good teaching comes in very different shapes and forms. And I think there is going to be a tension there between making sure it's not too bureaucratic and making sure it rewards all forms of good teaching. And the devil is clearly going to be in the detail. And I think in particular, linking the fee rises, at least for the HEPI-funded part of the sector, to teaching quality right from the outset muddles up various different things that do not necessarily sit well together. As Roger Brown says in a piece in this week's Times Higher, when writing about earlier attempts to measure teaching quality in higher education, the question of whether incremental funds should be used to help already strong departments to improve further or bring weaker centres up to a common standard was never resolved. Moreover, if we're honest, every higher education institution has some really good teaching and some not so really good teaching. And I think applying an across-the-board fee rise to an entire university, when that is the case, is perhaps a little tricky to defend. And were the government, when the Green Paper comes out, to backtrack on that link to fees in 2017 and had to have a very easy test for institutions in 2017 to pass to raise their fees, I think as a sector we should probably welcome that rather than carp about a U-turn. Because above all, it would be a tragedy if the TEF went off a half-cock and disrupted the whole agenda of better teaching in universities for the future. And I would like to see the TEF have as a motto, like the old Guinness advert, good things come to those who wait. We have a 5-year parliament and a majority government, after all. It's also, I think, a good thing that the government are looking again at the entry and exit of alternative providers. There are 3 particularly notable features about the current regime on this, to my mind. First, while no government minister has ever really been prepared to say that higher education providers, which are, after all, autonomous bodies, have a complete protection against failure, I think in reality it's implausible that any government would let a major one go under, just as Margaret Thatcher didn't let University College Cardiff collapse in the late 1980s, when she was right at the height of her powers and could have probably got away with doing so. Not only has there never been a clear regime for a failing institution, the HEPI risk register and other existing initiatives provide less secure protection in the new environment when most funding follows students rather than going through HEPI, and when the non-HEPI funded part of the sector, such as many of the institutions in this room, is so much bigger than it used to be. The second issue on this, I think, is that there have been some alternative providers who have withdrawn from higher education, partly, I've got to say, as a result of Home Office changes in recent years, and most famously, perhaps, Cavendish College, which wound up in 2011. It had been in the UK for 26 years. It had had a turnover of 4 million, and that shut, partly over the Home Office changes. One international student at a different college that closed told The Guardian a couple of years ago, "We wondered how it was that the UK gave no protection or consideration to us." And I think that's a very good question. And I think the government have been lucky that nobody, except perhaps The Guardian, have really been onto this, because ministers bear some of the direct responsibility for it, given the changes to international students. And there must come a point at which an institution is big enough that it does scrape the public consciousness when it fails. So we do need to think about these things in advance. And the third reason is that it's been concurrently too easy, in my view, for the poor providers to thrive, and we've seen some of them in this very city, while it's been too tough for the good ones to do so. And while we all know there have been some sharp practices, the better alternative providers, I know, have felt as if they're in the world's longest obstacle course with ever-changing rules and perhaps no clear finish line. And it's not exactly a surprise, therefore, that some investors have been lukewarm towards the sector. And to change sporting metaphors, last month Joe Johnson said, "I want to fulfil our aim of a level playing field for higher education providers of all types." I think that's a laudable aim and is a clear continuation of the 2011 white paper, which had a similar commitment. As I said in my first pamphlet for HEPI, Unfinished Business, the Case for Higher Education Legislation, we have an unkempt meadow rather than a nicely laid out playing field, and it's in desperate need of a mow. But to change my metaphor again, I think that level playing field could well turn out to be a bit of a mirage, because most of the people who talk in favour of a level playing field don't really mean it. I mean, even Joe Johnson is arguing for different rules for alternative providers in terms of tuition loan arrangements, in terms of student number controls, and we've got the Home Office, of course, that sees the two parts of the sector very differently too. And similarly, alternative providers have themselves said to government in recent years over earlier consultations, and I quote, "There should be a sufficient degree of flexibility to accommodate different sizes and missions of providers." And clearly it wouldn't be right to put a small specialist alternative provider through exactly the same processes as, say, Manchester University, where I was an undergraduate. And as I think I learned originally from a Study UK member, the goal should perhaps be equitable rather than equal treatment. You don't play cricket on a football pitch, after all. Now, I just want to end. When I was asked to speak, I said I would speak with 24 hours' notice on one condition, that I could talk just a tiny bit, and I will finish it, on about the paper that we've got coming out tomorrow, which is an assessment, as Alex said, of whether or not students were an important group of voters in the general election. Politicians always think students are an important group of voters, which is why Nick Clegg chased them and why Ed Miliband chased them. And before the election, the NUS claimed 200 seats, so 1/3 of the House of Commons would be determined by students' votes. We took a much more modest view, which was there'd only be about a dozen seats where students would impact the result, but we also said if the election was really close, that could be enough to swing it one way or the other. And by the way, I can ask you just not to tweet this bit of the speech because it's all embargoed, like Anthony's piece on pastoral care. It's all embargoed until midnight tonight. But I do have lots of hard copies of the report you can pick up, and so I don't have to take home again afterwards, which I'll put out on the front desk. Now, we know that didn't happen because students, now although students do tend to be more left-wing than the electorate as a whole, we ended up with a majority Conservative government, the first one for 23 years, and so their impact was clearly limited. And there's a wealth of analysis in the report, but one of the things we show is that Labour generally failed to win many student constituencies they were predicted to win from the Conservatives, and that's partly because the polls were flawed, and it's also because there may well have been a shy Tory effect among students. We also show that Labour did nonetheless win some other seats on very slim majorities that do have a lot of students in them. They won Chester, for example, by 93 votes. So they may won quite a few of those extra seats they won in England, because they improved their result in England by 15 seats, probably were down to students. We also show that both Conservatives and Labour benefited a lot from the collapse of the Lib Dem vote, but that probably had very little to do with students, because the Lib Dem collapse was so complete across the board. And in fact, if you divvy up, as we do in the paper, Lib Dem MPs who voted for fees and those who voted against and those who abstained, the results are pretty similar, to be honest. And they had similar chances of surviving or not surviving. Fourthly, there were some interesting differences in constituencies. Nicky Morgan in Loughborough did amazingly well, despite the number of students there. Similarly, Kat Smith on the other side, the Labour side, did amazingly well in Lancaster and Fleetwood on the strength of the student vote. And that's important because she went on to be one of the few MPs that nominated Jeremy Corbyn. And finally, we show that students are less associated in terms of their voting behaviour with student issues like getting rid of tuition fees than people have thought of, and more motivated by things that the rest of the electorate care about too, like will I get a good job? Now, you might ask, does any of this contemporary history really matter? Or is it only of interest to political nerds? And I would argue it does matter, because the first thing is, as John Denham, the former universities minister, says in the foreword to the publication, students are very hard under the new electoral registration system to A, get registered, and B, to access once on the electoral roll, and that matters for democracy. Secondly, the behaviour of students in the election and the way they behaved is very relevant to the forthcoming EU referendum, which universities are very keen for their students to vote in. And it also matters because it's one of the small parts of the story which other people haven't covered as to why we've ended up with the government that we've got. And I think I've been reading a lot about what the academics say about the coalition's higher education reforms. And the general consensus is here's one quote, for example, from someone at UCL-IOE who said they were the biggest changes to higher education there has ever been over any 5-year term. But I think that matters because in the next few weeks we could see such profound changes to the regulatory architecture, to the funding of research, and to the evaluation of teaching. I know the panel we're about to hear from are experts on, that it's likely the current government's reforms could be at least as profound and even not more profound on higher education than the coalitions were. Thank you very much.
four of the panel would now like to take their seats. Delighted to have five very experienced members of the panel. Mark Leach will be chairing. Mark is the director and editor-in-chief of Wonkhe, which is, I think it's safe to say, fast becoming the higher education sector's favourite place for policy discussion and the occasional bit of speculation. Mark was also previously worked for the NUS and as a special advisor. He also had a position at HEPI. And if you've seen today's Guardian, Mark was also the author of an article in today's Guardian asking whether HEPI has had its chips. And I'm sure that has nothing to do with Yvonne Hawkins' late cancellation. We also have Anne Miller, the registrar from the University of Buckingham. Ian Kimber, the director of quality development from the QAA. And we have Joy Elliott-Bowman, who is Policy and Public Affairs Manager for Study UK from July of this year. Previously, she worked for several years in student unions and the NUS. I'll hand over.
Thank you, Alex. We're going to start off by asking the panel to respond to what Nick had to say. So if everyone could speak briefly for a few minutes, and then we'll get into the debate section. So, Ian, why don't you start us off?
Sure, thanks Mark. Good afternoon everyone, and pleased to see a few of you braving it out to the very end. It's been a great day actually. I've been here from beginning to end as well, and very instructive for me. So in relation to some of the points that Nick raised in his presentation, I've worked with government, not in this country, but a government nonetheless based on the Westminster system, and I'm very familiar as well with the trials and tribulations of the passage of legislation. It certainly I think brought down a Prime Minister and an Education Minister in Australia not too long ago. A significant contributor to a spill was their inability to get through significant changes to the higher education sector through both houses of the Australian Parliament. That was over a period of 18 months or 2 years, and it still hasn't gone through. So I think the political climate is ripe. I think it's right. I think it's needed, but I don't hold my breath that it's actually going to be a silver bullet or a panacea for the policy dilemmas that we face right here, right now. So that's one. In relation to the teaching excellence framework, and Nick raised the very real fear in relation to it that it is devised and implemented on a very, very, very tight timeline. And look, where QAA together with HEPI and HEA are working very, very hard with the department on developing up the TEF, particularly how it might look in the first year. And everyone involved is conscious that if it's not a credible thing from the get-go, then it's not going to be credible over the following years either. And this morning, in a hearing of the Select Committee, the BIS Select Committee, Say Jarvid actually said that the priority is to get it right. So that's reassuring words, I think, to a sector that is rightly concerned about damage that might be done if it's not right. My third point that I want to make at this point in time is a little bit of a departure, I suppose, from what Nick mentioned, but I want to make it because it gives us a bit of a jumping off point, I think, to some broader conversations. And that is that over the last 12 months or so, what we haven't really heard about in the debate about higher education, regulation and quality assurance is the need for the framework however it looks, to operate on the basis of a partnership between the stakeholders as a joint enterprise between government providers, students, funders and the quality body, whoever that might be. You'll notice I'm studiously avoiding saying QAA, but we might come back to that later. I might put a plug in, we'll see. But I think that for me, and particularly as an outsider looking in, it is really a piece of the puzzle and the discussion and the debate that is missing. That the way it will operate best is if it is a partnership between the interested parties that can regulate and quality assure for what at the end of the day is a very important mutual interest in achieving the best for the sector and for students.
Thanks, Ian. Anne?
Well, I'm delighted to be here, having, as a member of the oldest independent or alternative provider in the sector, having been established 40 years, and I'm afraid I've been there many of those years. But it gives me great pleasure to be here because we joined the external regulatory framework in 2002, and it was a very controversial move for us because we were the first independent university. And picking up on what Nick said about the next year or so being a very bumpy ride for all of us alternative providers, I wanted to provide a little bit of reassurance that you can survive it. We've been involved for the 12 years. I know you've all had letters recently from BIS informing you of the data requirements. It is survivable. We're not only being hit by this quality assurance, quality assessment revised framework that Ian mentioned just now. We're being hit by all these other regulatory areas today, we've heard about today, including Prevent, Tier 4, you're going to have to join the Office of the Independent Adjudicator. We're having this whole convergence of regulation upon us at the time we're about to have a green paper that's going to look at excellence in teaching. And I think the key point that as a university that's independent but also being part of that framework, I think what Anthony said earlier today is the thing to never forget is that students are at the heart of all of this. The 2011 paper said that they were at the heart of the system. Now they're saying teaching's at the heart of the system. It all comes down to the same thing. We want to give our students a good quality education. We want to ensure our standards are high. The good thing for us as alternative providers is that we're used to having to meet student need. We've known since we were founded we didn't have government money. We now are eligible for some of the student loans, but it is something that's in our blood, that's what we have to do. So I think what I want to say is I'm very pleased from what we heard from BIS today, that BIS, HEPI, QAA, all these regulatory bodies are now talking to one another and they're coming to talk to us because there's been a lack of joined up regulation in the last certainly 15 years that I'm very familiar with. And I think to at least feel that we're being listened to and you're going to be listened to as we all have these individual contacts will be a good thing. So I think the title of this session is that it is going to be an adventure. I think the Green Paper should reflect that we all want to put teaching and students at the heart of what we do. We want excellence in teaching and we want to be a big player in the new regulatory regime. HEPI define established providers as publicly funded institutions. We've challenged that in our response at the Independent Universities Group. We've challenged that to say that we believe established providers are those who are providing good quality education to students, be they publicly funded or independent. And that's what we're hoping the regime will recognise.
Thank you, Anne. Joy.
Great. I'm a recent addition to the panel. If you've noticed in your books that my name isn't on this space, but I'm keen. Alex asked me to fill in. I thought this presents a bit of a unique opportunity to put forward the view of quality that I've developed over the years as my part, as part of the student movement, both in Canada and in the UK. And as Alex mentioned, I've only recently come to study UK, having worked with National Union of Students and student unions and in universities over the last quite a few years, since about 1999. And for me, a quality regime has always really been about assuring a quality of experience. It's really about that experience, about what are students' expectations, what are they getting out of that experience, those years that they spend studying, and the ability to achieve, and the students' ability to make the achievements that they seek through that education. And of course, they're varying. Some are focused on jobs and the kind of the outcome of a salary, and others are actually focused on the learning experience or their kind of distance traveled. And my frustration has always been around when the flexibility of higher education learning is stifled, when we're not focusing on these changing needs of students, and when we're not advancing our opportunities for students to push boundaries in their own education. And there's been kind of a little bit of a chat, but kind of more broadly in the sector about this partnership kind of area where students are partners in their education. And for me, that partnership is actually part of the innovation. Are you asking students what they want out of that classroom experience? Is there something more that they want to kind of study? Is there different areas, is there a different direction? And then making changes. And I think sometimes the HE regulation regimes inhibit that. And in fact, if students' choice and student experience within higher education has been really more prolifically covered in relation to consumerism in the public purse than it has been when we're actually talking about quality assurance. I've seen more positive movements from CMA in terms of that elements than I have from a lot of the HE quality sector. And I think we need to really look at how that dichotomy impacts the way that we teach and deliver, and the way that education in a subject, the actual concept of educating students in an area, actually moves forward. Because if we are thinking about students as, say, consumers, and we are looking at whether or not we're being compliant with this regime or that, are we actually looking at how are we taking the education that we have and moving it forward as we learn more in that particular field. I joined Study UK in July, as I said, but mainly because of the students that I've actually met over the last few years working within the student movement and within universities who studied independent providers. And they've said they do that because of flexibility and choice, because of the different learning experience they knew they were getting out of it. And I remember visiting one of Study UK's members in kind of, even before I started, we went to a degree show, and they said they studied at that particular College of Art because of that different experience, because of that personalized experience, because they knew that the topic they were studying was done by industry experts, and they had friends that had gone to a university where a similar topic was studied, who wanted that independent kind of mentality within a more kind of personalized environment and weren't getting it. So they know what they want. Students want that choice. They want to say, this is the style to which I learn in, and this is where I'm going to find that. But sometimes choice is being blocked, both inadvertently, as we try to create a system based on mass production of education, but also quite intentionally, as we use a peer-based system developed on the basis of only one peer, one style of peer. And history has taught us that universities are the be-all and end-all of quality to a certain extent. And so we build systems, we build metrics, we build processes, we build the expectation of processes on one set of peer and then call that peer review and apply it to everyone. That doesn't give students assurances of quality in HE. And students do need assurances on providers of HE. And it has to be all providers. It can't just be those who are eligible for public funding. And the students that I've spoken to over the last few years, and particularly the ones who are from institutions who have exited the system. You know, Nick was speaking about the student in The Guardian. There have been a couple other news stories, but I've spent many years actually talking to those students who've been part of those who exit the system. And they said that they don't care about publicly, privately funded. It doesn't matter to them. They don't see a difference, particularly if they're international students, because they pay for both. And so student protections take on a very different role here, because really what we're saying is, are we providing an assurance that A, you're going to get your education, B, it's going to be good, and C, it's going to meet your expectations. Education, of course, has a public value, which makes it fundamentally different than, you know, those that might say it's a consumer good would argue. I really hate the analogies. You know, education is like buying a car. It's not like buying a car. I've never got a plush meerkat for making my choice of which university I'm going to attend. And buying in terms of consumerism in education is so much more of a personal investment than any other product. You cannot call this a consumer market. It means that the personal investment that the student has, the investment that the economy has, the investment that the UK has, means that it's really a public good, and the public, the government, has a role to play in regulating it, irregardless of funding model. We cannot, again, say that only HEPI can only regulate HEPI publicly funded bodies because that's all that they have the power to do so. If you call yourself an HE institution, the quality needs to be assured by the UK government. For a student, there is no definition. I mean, realistically, we are saying, when you're a student, that we're no longer experiencing a differentiation between publicly funded and privately funded higher education. Students are now paying in England £9,000. We pay either way. Perhaps, when we were down at £1,800, you could say that there was a large public investment, and therefore, that kind of made more of an impact. But now students are paying, and in some significant enough that we as students, and I graduated from my PhD in 2011, so it's been a little bit of a while, but not that long time that I've been a student. We look at debt as an insurmountable inevitability, either way, irregardless of whether we're paying it to an independent institution or we're paying it to a publicly funded institution. It's such a sum of money that the difference in cost is actually insignificant. Most of us don't even think about when we will pay it back, or if we will pay it back. Decisions are made about whether or not we can pay it back full stop. Do I go and spend the money, or do I not? It's not, do I spend 5,000, 6,000, 7,000, 9,000, 25,000? It's not really that kind of a question anymore. Overall cost is becoming less significant. And that means that students are looking at quality as part of their investment in a different way. And Nick kind of alluded to this, investment of their years of effort, investment in the lifestyle that they hope to achieve, about what they really enjoy, what they want to make money in, how they want to make money. Do they want to be their own boss? Will they be confident in taking the next step in that career choice when they're finished that program? And it means, for quality, it means asking different questions than we currently ask. It means asking different questions that our metrics currently ask. It means that a peer review of processes where an institution can assure quality of itself means little or nothing to students. And it means that somehow we need to articulate the student experience in our quality assessment in a way that we haven't done before. We're still working on a model where free education was the norm, and that's no longer the case. And while this is happening, I think students and other stakeholders, for that matter, will look at independent providers as much as universities. And there's going to be that move. It is going to be the case that we're going to say, what is my outcome, and who's going to give it to me, and how do I quality, and for a government it has to say, how do I quality assure that outcome? And I think then will the UK start reflecting on the artificial divides they've put into this quality regime, and perhaps start looking at, in fact, what are students wanting out of that experience in the end.
Thank you, Joy. I'm going to abuse my position as panel chair and just pick up a few of these points and ask the panel some questions before we open up to the floor. And just really interested in some of the things Joy is talking about there. And for you, two questions. Do you recognise the student that Joy is talking about? And do you see your institution as delivering the public good as Joy described, or is it part of the consumer market?
I think I do recognise the type of student that Joy's describing. I think most students would say that they're not really interested in process and how we do things, as long as they're sure that they get the best experience that they get, and that they do as well as they can. And one of the measures of that, of course, is league tables. That's what they look at, rather than whether or not you have a good programme approval procedure as required to make sure the degrees are valid and that they're of an appropriate standard. But I think, as well as that, there is the need for that engagement with students that enables them to know what you're doing to help their experience. You'll probably be familiar with the fact that we didn't have to take part in the National Student Survey, but we did voluntarily, because we had a pretty good idea that our students were happy with their academic experience, and so we were, it was a risk, but we had the benefits from that. But I think it's important that you keep on top of that through regular, they may come to you because you were top in whatever league table it was they checked. It may be because they like the idea, certainly in our case it's the 2-year degree. They like the fact that they're going to be out in the job market before some of their peers. And these things are very important to them, and we recognise that. But what we also do is once they're with us, we don't let that ball drop. We make sure that they are aware of all the things that we're doing to maintain that student experience, the employability prospects, which we're pretty high in as well, and that they're aware of it, so that they actually feel that we are in partnership with them. In fact, I'll tell you a very short story of the first time we took part in the National Student Survey. You have to get a 50% response rate for your results to be published. So initially it was seen as another regulatory thing that we were doing on top of having joined QAA 3 years previously, undergone a review. It was seen as another regulatory thing. And boy, how things have changed in 10 years. It's now one of our biggest marketing tools. But they actually, in our promoting of it and our engagement with them over it, they were the ones who said, when we devised the T-shirts, that everybody went around promoting it, said, can we put on the back of it, we're in this together. And that's what we've tried to sustain in the intervening 10 years. In terms of Nick's second point, in terms of the public good, I think, yes, we are. It isn't, we're a charity, we're not for profit, we're not ploughing any money, student fees, we're ploughing it back into the institution, into their experience. We offer bursaries, we offer scholarships, we try and widen participation, although we're not members of Offer and we don't have an agreement with Offer. It's something we do because we think it's a good, and whether it's the public good because we're a charity, or whether it's a public good as education should be, I think we try never to lose sight of that fact, even that whilst saying that we believe, in fact we believe that's what independence enables us to do. We choose to do it, we're not made to do it, but ultimately it benefits the student experience, and I think it also it does contribute to the public good.
Thanks, Anne. One of the other phrases that's crept up quite a bit in what people are saying is this idea of market exit, which seems like quite a kind of gentle way of describing something fairly problematic for a lot of people, their careers, the students involved, of course, the HE market, which would be affected if we saw failure or people going bankrupt or belly up or however you want to describe it. I'm just interested in Ian and QAA's perspective, given they've got such an important part of the regulatory system under their control, and to what extent you feel that market exit could be a consequence of what you do, or should it be?
I think that it is very interesting that there's such a focus on it, and I'd probably suggest, picking up on what the tenor of what Joy's been saying, that the focus on it is possibly for the wrong reasons. The focus is on it because of the assumption that if you open up and marketise more, then you invite greater chance and greater risk of failure. But I think really what we should be thinking about when we talk about exit is how in this, whatever the process might be, are the students' interests best preserved. QAA would most certainly welcome a more systematic framework to manage exit. At the moment, it's not particularly, and this should and could have a greater focus on how students are best served. I'm probably thinking here of the more dramatic exit, not the exit that's about a university ceasing a course, but a provider closing down an entire school or closing down an entire operation, for instance, which has the potential to leave students high and dry, as we all know. We can look at the front end of this. We can look at, all right, how robust are the processes that are in place. I'm sorry, Joy, I'm talking about process. How robust are the processes that you have in place, provider, to ensure that you don't find yourself in a position where you have to exit, or if the exit is something that is your decision, what are your arrangements to ensure the interests of students? Do you have agreements with other providers to place your students in like courses? So we can look at that at the front end, but I think that ultimately there's a sector-wide responsibility here, particularly when we're talking about exit that affects international students who are the most vulnerable, I think, in this situation. Then I think there's a sector-wide responsibility for making sure that arrangements are in place that are far more systematic, far more robust, underpinned by some kind of certainty, some level of certainty for students. Now, I could be referring here to some kind of sector-wide assurance framework. I could be referring here to arrangements and agreements that are made, for instance, under the auspices of organisations like this, who could broker things like student placements. It could be arrangements that are set up by amongst mission groups. It could be arrangements that are set up regionally based. But I think that there has to be a joint responsibility, an acknowledgement that what is at risk here is students, and by dint of that, the reputation of UK higher education as a not just quality-based, but also a safe and reliable place to come and study.
Thanks, Ian. Nick, I want you to elaborate perhaps on your points about exit, but I just want to throw in another point, which is something you said. Something you said I thought was really interesting in your remarks earlier, which was there's a risk that the TEF could become a distraction from good teaching. And I'm really interested in this idea because the way the TEF has been talked about so far has been about the metrics, about the kind of the policy agenda, about the markets, and this is what brings us to exit. But to what extent are we massively jumping the gun? And should we be talking about the classroom and teaching? Michael Gove tried to start a revolution in the classroom in schools. And if we follow through the rhetoric from Joe Johnson, is he trying to start a revolution in teaching in classrooms in higher education in a similar way? And if so, isn't that kind of the fertile territory to be exploring now? But I'll leave you to
Yeah, thank you. Well, just a few very quick responses to that. I mean, I think on exit and then on the other issue. I think the whole exit debate is partly a consequence of we have, even beyond the alternative provider sector, an autonomous group of higher education institutions. Certainly when I was working in government, we would forever be being lobbied by people, make sure our university doesn't close down the philosophy department, make sure our university doesn't close down the chemistry department, to which our response was, we either have an autonomous sector or we don't, and actually you probably don't want government meddling in, certainly departmental, even though I think there is a case for making sure strategically important and vulnerable subjects are protected. You probably don't want politicians or ministers getting involved in micromanaging institutions like that. I also think, my background before working in higher education was in pensions, and I was working on pensions when they set up the sort of lifeboat for failing pension schemes, which protects pensioners' rights. Now, I know from the process of working on the establishment of that setting up an exit regime is not a way of saying not necessarily a way of saying you secretly want lots of institutions to exit. It's a way of actually recognising reality, which is we don't have lots of money flowing through HEPI anymore, so HEPI can't step in the way it used to. We've got a much bigger alternative provider sector than we used to have. We play in the international space, so there'd be serious reputational risk if a big institution went under. And I think it's an interesting debate, but again, like on the TEF, the devil will be in the detail. and as it was on pensions, actually. On teaching, I mean, I'm a former teacher myself, a former school teacher, not a university teacher, although according to Anthony Selden, they're the same thing, of course. And one thing you don't really want your hands bound on, in my view, in terms of teaching, is on innovation in the classroom. And I think what we need to ensure that TEF is not is something that stops innovation and experimentation. And we have to recognise sometimes experiments go wrong, but you want pedagogy, I never know quite how to say that word, to be constantly evolving and to be implementing new things we learn. And you only learn new things by trying new things out. So I think it's very important we don't lose innovation in the classroom, in the lecture hall, particularly as new technology comes on stream. And I think the other thing, I was only struck by this because an economist wrote to me and said, can I write on your blog a piece about how the TEF will force people to specialise? So in the past we've had research-informed teaching at a lot of universities, or industry-informed teaching, or people who are involved in the creative sector putting that to use for half the week in teaching. And his argument was, as an economist thinking about incentives, that people would be incentivised to specialise in what they're good at. So if you're good at teaching under the TEF, to make sure your institution gets the maximum TEF scores, your institution will make sure you do as much teaching as possible. If you're good at research, to maximise your REF scores, the opposite. And his argument was less about innovation, it was more about specialism, but also that could hinder things because you wouldn't get the cross fertilisation that comes from having teachers who also do research, who also work in industry, and so on.
Thanks, Nick. I'm going to open it up to questions from the floor. So I'll take them in rounds of two. Any takers? If there aren't, I'm going to start picking on people. Over there. And can you say where you're from and who you are? Thank you.
Steve Bristow, Open Direction Limited, ex all sorts of places and currently working with all sorts of places. I've been listening with great interest to the different nuances coming through on these questions from the panel, and indeed across the whole of the day. I can't help but feel that what we're trying to do now as a sector, as an industry, if you want to put it that way, is catch up very fast with years and years of neglect. When take one example, a big one. When the then Labour government introduced managed migration and set in place all of the arrangements that we now know as Tier 4 particularly, there was quite a sense in the independent sector, or at least amongst those of us who were interested in trying to make sure that we could build towards what's been known as the level playing field, which Nick colourfully referred to just now, a sense that we actually needed to have a system in place that would license and regulate that level playing field. Governments have shied away from that for all sorts of reasons, originally because of the power of the autonomous universities, but more recently because of what I think we can only put down to infighting. It's been very much easier to work in other countries with other governments and to build systems that have separate arrangements for licensing, where all sorts of appropriate due diligence work can be done on the one hand, and accreditation or quality assurance systems on the other. And so, to pick up something else that Nick was just saying, and I say this as a former chair of a couple of pension funds, there are alternatives to the way that the pensions regulator went about introducing the PPF, the Pension Protection Fund. You don't have to take money off institutions there and then to ensure that if they exit the market in whatever way, whether as a result of government policy changes, as a result of their own inability to meet the market needs appropriately, you don't have to protect student monies by taking the money off, provided you have some sort of bonding system that maybe holds in escrow funds that, a portion of funds that students will pay to colleges. I was, for a number of years, well, I still am a council member.
Stephen, can I push you for a question? Sorry, can we focus it?
Sorry, we're getting towards the end of the afternoon,
Yeah.
and let me focus this as a question. Why, 10 years after the first policy work was done on the system that is now emerging, do we still not have arrangements for protection of student fees on the one hand, and more importantly, transfer agreements, support agreements between providers of all sorts in the event of institutional collapse?
Okay. Well, that's a clear question. Joy, do you want to?
Sure. There are two reasons. The first is the lack of a clear credit transfer framework, which makes continuation of studies, which is obviously the ideal situation in case of market exit, call it, or institutional failure, the option. The second is a terrible disease that I like to call remititis. It's where everyone says this is my remit, and I can't go outside of that. And it's created a strange system, and over the last this kind of 18 months or so, myself and Alex and a few other people in this room have been part of a task force to try to deal with the kind of students that have been kind of turfed out of their colleges as a result of Tier 4. And we went around the room where each of us said what we would offer to this task force. And the amount of "it's not my problems" was astounding, absolutely astounding. Everyone wanted to say this, well, they're not my students, or they're not part of our membership, or they're not covered by X, Y, and Z. Well, they're here. They're here, they're in a system that you created. The absence of legislation doesn't make you any less responsible for the fact that they are now without a course, without their money, and without an opportunity to finish their chosen program. So I think we have to get over that. We have to say, as a sector, do we genuinely care about the lack of protection, and how are we going to address that as a sector? Or in fact, are each of us going to attempt to piecemeal a solution for our own individual groups? And if that's the decision, then that's fine. Everybody needs to do that. But right now, we're happy to sort of pretend that everyone else is doing something and that we'll be okay, because it won't really affect us.
Nick?
Yeah, I think the reason we haven't grappled with this on a practical political level is that politicians have exhausted their political capital on funding. So when Tony Blair got through £3,000 fees, it was the tightest vote he had got at that point. He had a massive majority in the House of Commons, got it through on a majority of 5. And once that was gone through, I don't think there was an enormous appetite. There weren't any other significant white or green papers from the Labour government after 2004. Similarly, in the coalition, once the coalition had gone through the very painful process of then tripling fees for a second time, as I said in my remarks earlier, there was no appetite to revert to any other real HE issues. And the political appetite for spending political capital on some quite tricky HE issues just was not there. And that's why I think it's not, but the current government is in many ways a blank slate. They don't see themselves as a continuation of the coalition. They see themselves as a wholly new government who can set a bold agenda over the next 5 years. Now, whether that's right or wrong is not really here nor there. That's what they see themselves. And I think, therefore, it's not just a coincidence that they have produced or are about to produce, we think, the most radical higher education green paper since at least 2003, and maybe since some way before then.
Yeah, sorry, Andrew.
Yeah, I just wondered if the glimmer of hope from today was the fact that maybe with this more joined up approach that we won't have continual changes, so that sort of arrangement can be put in place, because what we've had in the last 25 years in terms of quality assurance and regulation has been constant change. And now, as I said earlier, add to all of those, you've got now the CMA, you've got Prevent, there hasn't been any there's been the links, it'll be QAA reviewing us for Tier 4, QAA, the CMA are now looking at us. It sounds to me as though maybe there's a glimmer of hope that there's going to be some joined up thinking in terms of the quality assessment regime. But I think, getting back to what was said about the TEF, I hope that the Green Paper will make clear how the TEF and the quality quality assessment regime are going to fit. They need to be linked, but they shouldn't be joined, I think. Otherwise, we'll get into more complicated situations that won't clarify the question.
Thanks, Anne. Sorry, and you're going to miss out on that one. I'm going to take a question over here.
Mine wasn't so much a question as a response to Steve's question, which is that there has been a change about the regulation of protecting students in exiting situations where those students are covered. Just trying to shout without a mic. Where those students are covered, whether they're on a franchised or validated programme, insofar as there was a late addition to Section B4 of the QA's Quality Code, which, with a change of a few words, implies that universities or other providers with degree awarding powers who are passing those on to another deliverer have the responsibility for those students. There's a very clear change in terminology which gives that implication. And I'm not sure it's been tested in the field, as it were, but that's now there. So there has been. It's a very a deft piece of work. And I think in terms of a validating degree awarding body, I think it's entirely proper. But that change has been made.
Thanks. Any more questions? Yes, over here.
Hi, Gordon Sweeney from the Point Blank Music School. A lot of the positivity that we've heard over the day and sort of previous to that is about the Joint Intelligence Unit. Everyone seems quite chuffed about that, and it generally seems like it's going to be a nice thing. How does that bode with some of the panel's predictions for the demise of HEPI?
Ian?
I didn't make any such prediction. It was someone else at this table that wrote about it this morning, not me. I think I did say, though, in my opening point about the importance of partnership in the quality assurance framework, and if there is a funding council that has the function that the funding council currently does, then it needs to be part of the quality assurance framework, as does a role for an independent quality assurance body to do the work separate from the funding function, as does a proactive and forward-looking government department that recognises the need to engage with the sector and the framework. So I think what the Alternative Provider Intelligence Unit is doing is actually setting up a model for a way of engaging with the sector in terms of not just assuring quality, but also in terms of working in the kind of partnership that I referred to. And it's very much the same kind of approach that we put forward in our response to the quality assessment review ourselves. And we would very much look forward to continuing our work with the intelligence unit, with the funding council in that role, with government in that role into the future. So as a model, it should continue. The players in that model and the roles in that model may well change depending on the outcome of the consultation.
Nick, do you want to answer that as well?
I think we should go to the other hand in the audience. I'm not sure I do particularly. I think, yeah.
There's another hand. Oh, Robin. Yeah.
Thanks. Robin Middlehurst, Kingston University, and like Steve, a number of other hats, including Higher Education Academy just at the moment. But my question really is about finance and tax and providers who have businesses which are global and are not necessarily just in the UK. We talk an awful lot about quality assurance, and quality assurance is effectively a national business, and we think about higher education as a national business and deal with it in that way, even an English business, I should say, in terms of legislation. But that's not the way much of higher education is going. How and in what ways does the panel think we can shift up a gear to be able to think about both the huge amounts of money that are engaged in education, businesses across the world, and that relationship with quality assurance or quality? We've separated the two. I don't think they can be separated.
Nick, do you want to have a stab?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very big question. I'm not sure I've ever been asked it before either. I mean, certainly when we worked on the educational export strategy in BIS back in whenever it came out, 2013, I think, we were certainly very keen to take an expansive definition of educational exports to really capture the whole gamut. So it wasn't just a plant campus, or it wasn't just some validating some courses, or it was the architects, it was the lawyers, it was all sorts, it was the publishers. And we also, we published a HEPI about a year ago, a book by Martin Harrow, who's now just left JISC, of course, who was entertaining the prospect of, quite an enticing prospect, what he called the university in a box model. So all the back-end stuff, particularly the techie stuff, that could be offered by the UK to someone who wanted to set up a new institution anywhere across the world. I think the quality assurance stuff is really tough. I mean, Ian's the expert on this, but I'm very pleased at these strides that have been made in recent months and years to look at the provision of UK qualifications overseas, because I think there was a real potential risk of reputational damage being done by that. But I mean, Ian's the real expert on that, but I think that was a real problem which has been grappled with. But how you answer that question when technology is transforming all of this in such rapid ways. I mean, I'd love to know your own answer to your question, Robin, because I think it's such a big, it's like when people try to cover in a tweet an enormous topic. This is a really big agenda. You could have a whole day conference on its own, I think. But I'm sure Ian's got views.
I'll just add a couple of things to what Nick has said. It's hugely challenging. There's no doubt about that. Not just with the technology and changing the way in which substantially and fundamentally in which higher education, all education is being delivered, but it's also about the models that are being employed, the corporate and the financial structures that go along with that, I think, is enormously challenging as well. We've seen in the UK in fairly recent times the good and the bad in terms of transnational corporations entering into higher education provision. And this becomes an extremely difficult thing from a regulator and quality assurance perspective to manage, because it's very, very difficult to identify. If we talk about autonomous institutions and responsibility for quality, so that autonomy and responsibility must rest somewhere. It becomes very difficult to identify when you have a multi-layered corporate entity operating across national boundaries, geographical boundaries, to identify where that responsibility sits, because it's very easy to shift it around if you're so inclined. And this then, I think, goes very much to the conversation we were having about exit. Going back to my own experience in Australia, we've had examples, actually not so much in higher education, but in vocational education training, of asset stripping, where an overseas entity will purchase a college, run it for a little while, build up a bit of capital, and then literally overnight pull out, strip the assets, the capital's moved offshore. What do? You don't know where to locate the culprit, as it were. Even if you did, what kind of legal basis do you have for following it up? So, Robin, I don't actually have an answer to that kind of quandary. But I think, to hark back to the question about exit, that kind of exit, which does leave students high and dry, does need to be catered for in the system and assumed as a system responsibility.
Thanks, Ian. We have to wrap up this session now, but I'm just going to ask the panel for a quick answer. If it's keeping you awake at night, the Green Paper's coming anytime soon, what is the one measure that you want to see in there? Quick answers, please. Joy.
I think it's going to have to be student protections. Yeah.
Anne? Is there time? Okay. Yeah.
Happy
Okay.
to.
Okay. Paul Cassell, UCFB. If we truly believe that students are the heart of everything we do, and whilst we've got a window of opportunity to change things, shouldn't we be looking at trying to have a learning excellence framework rather than a teaching excellence framework?
Anne, do you want to say something about that?
Well, what I was going to say was I think I'd like the Green Paper to define excellence in teaching. So perhaps I would expand that to define excellence in learning and teaching, or how that will impact on learning.
Nick?
Yeah, I mean, of course, the two things are inextricably linked. I mean, it used to annoy me slightly when Joy's former colleagues at the NUS used to talk about how learning was a partnership with institutions, because of course it is. It was like the most basic point anybody could ever make, dressed up as quite a profound one. Of course, learning and teaching are two sides of the very same coin. And what worries me is as the sector grows, and as we take on more first and family students, more students who've, with tougher backgrounds, more students who find the jump from school or college to university bigger, what worries me is that we don't think about our transition to independent directed learning that goes on in HE to the degree that we should. And for me, we shouldn't only talk about teaching TEF, but I wouldn't want there to be a separate LEF. I would want the TEF to capture the things that quite rightly concern you. Yeah. Yeah, although really good teaching performance should deliver. Give me an example of really good teaching performance that doesn't deliver learning. Right, you mean box ticking? Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean that's a fair point, and clearly the TEF, if it becomes a box ticking bureaucratic exercise.
Well, that's why I think you need the definition and then the metrics by which it's going to be measured. They're the critical things.
Yeah, no, because of course it's fascinating. Even 10 years after graduating, your view is different to even 6 months after graduating. You don't always know what you've learnt in HE until you've had to apply it or until you've had to some way into your career. Yeah.
And Nick, your one wish list?
Well, it won't be in there, I don't think, but I would like I would like there to be a lot of thought put to the advice and guidance aspect of information advice and guidance. I suspect there might be some stuff on there on, more information for applicants, but I would like there to be something on there on in advice and guidance as well. But I doubt it will be in there, but that's what I'd like to see.
And have you given us your wish list item?
Yes, it was to have a proper definition of what they mean by excellence in teaching, because the HAA have said they need one of those. We need one of those to be able to apply those metrics. As I said a moment ago, I think the metrics that are proposed under the teaching assessment consultation, there was a lack of clarity there, and I take the gentleman's point here. A lot of it is about outcomes as opposed to learning. And the route to them. So yes, definition of excellence in teaching.
And in the final word, your wish list item, and it can't be a strong wall for QAA or anything like that.
But you said I could. No, he didn't. And I said I wouldn't. Right at the outset. What I would like to see is an opportunity presented by the Green Paper to cut through the agglomeration and add-ons and ad hocness that the overarching quality assurance framework has taken to be at this point in time, and provide us with the opportunity to identify what a coherent and, to take Anne's point, joined up framework can be.
Thanks, Ian. And that's your lot. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
do come and take one of these so I don't have to carry them all home, please.
Thank you so much to Nick, to Mark, Ian, Alan, Joy, for bringing the day to a close with such style. I hope you found it a stimulating programme, a suitable balance of practical advice and debate. I certainly feel like to borrow an idea from Anthony. I feel like that it has provided nourishment for my intellect, my emotions, and my body. I'd like to thank all speakers one more time, but also thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to come here and be part of the debate and to contribute during the day. Your reward are drinks just outside the door there, and please do enjoy them, and I hope to see you next year.